David, what are you doing home? My wife of 28 years, Rebecca, asked as she stepped through the garage door. She saw me sitting at the kitchen table, less than 10 feet away. Her presence partially blocked the view of a younger man following her into the house. As always, Rebecca looked stunning, tall at 5'9", with a healthy 145-pound frame. Her auburn hair fell just over her shoulders, and she was dressed professionally for work. Today, she wore a white blouse with an extra button undone, revealing a hint of cleavage that was hard to ignore. Her black linen skirt accentuated her world-class legs, and her 3-inch heels perfectly filled out the back of her skirt. I briefly considered her question, which felt somewhat ridiculous, and responded with equal sarcasm. I live here. The irritation that had been bubbling up over the past few weeks showed when she shot back, "Of course you live here. What I want to know is why you're home at 3:30 in the afternoon." I often tell people that I've loved Rebecca since the moment we met. I had an appointment with 4 top executives at her company, where Rebecca worked as an administrative assistant. She met me in the lobby and escorted me to the senior suite of offices for my meetings. Hours later, when she walked me back to the lobby, I took a chance and asked her out for dinner. The rest, as they say, is history. By now, Rebecca's companion had stepped around her and stood by her side. I half expected him to smirk, but instead, his intelligent eyes showed signs of concern. Things weren't going as planned. I could ask you the same question, Angie. What are you doing home an hour and a half early? Rebecca and I have been inseparable since our first date. I'm proud to say that I've devoted every ounce of energy to her and our family. I worked hard to build a small but successful insurance brokerage firm with the support of her employer. Rebecca also went to college, earning a bachelor's degree in 6 years. Rebecca had climbed the ranks from a support role to heading human resources in the company's Hartford, Connecticut office. I had loved her unconditionally for almost 3 decades, but as I sat there, I couldn't help but see the monster she had become over the past few weeks. I forced myself to stay calm, even though every part of me wanted to break her as effectively as she broke me when I found out she was lying and cheating. When I gave Angie my usual crooked grin, she responded, "We came home early to talk with you." "We?" I asked, looking directly into Angie's eyes as the man beside her took the opportunity to introduce himself. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and confidently said, "Mr. Whitman, David, I'm Joshua Tanner. I'm the new attorney at Kellerman & Sons, and I've been working closely with Rebecca for the last couple of months." Ignoring his outstretched hand, I continued to stare Angie down, suppressing the primal urge to leap up and wrap my hands around his neck. Instead, I growled, "I know exactly who and what you are." For the first time, I saw a flicker of concern in my wife's eyes, and she cringed when I added, "You threatened to cut the balls off the last person who disrespected you, so why are you letting this pile of garbage get away with it in your own home?" Angie looked worried and confused. She's always been a careful planner, and I was certain she and her boy toy had prepared for every possible scenario. In her mind, I was already a compliant fool. A quick glance at him made me smile. His tension was palpable, and I could tell he was as uncomfortable as I was angry. A showdown was coming, and it was going to be nothing like what they had planned. I took a few deep breaths, trying to push the anger and disgust into a quiet corner of my heart. Let's get on with this, I thought. Time to throw them off balance. "Why don't I make us some drinks?" I offered. "We can talk in the living room." "A glass of wine, please," Angie requested quietly. When I turned to her companion, he seemed wary but said, "Rebecca tells me you enjoy bourbon and craft beer." I nodded. "I do." Then I got up from the kitchen table and headed to the bar in the family room. As I left, I heard urgent whispering behind me as they moved to the living room. A few minutes later, I joined them in the living room, where they were seated together on the sofa. I handed Angie a glass of her favorite Merlot and gave him a tulip glass full of amber ale. I took my 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in the armchair across from them. After raising my glass in a mock salute, I took a small sip of the burning liquid. He returned the toast and took a sip of his beer, studying the color and carbonation before commenting, "This is one of the most complex amber ales I've ever had." "What is it?" "Pepsi Blue Ribbon," I answered, watching as his eyes flared with anger. Angie looked confused and then blurted out, "You've always said PBR is worse than donkey urine and the crappiest beer ever made." She was halfway through her comment when she noticed me laughing. She exploded, "You're such an ass. We came home to have a calm talk with you, and you've been nothing but rude and condescending." I just smiled and questioned, "I'm rude and condescending? I suppose this is the moment where I get a lesson in polite, uplifting conversation from my ever-faithful wife." Angie cringed, avoiding eye contact, and her companion tried to take over. "David, we've come here to discuss." I cut him off. "You had it right the first time." "Excuse me." He looked confused, as people like him often do. "When you first addressed me, you called me Mr. Whitman before presumptuously switching to David." "I prefer—" "No, I insist. You call me Mr. Whitman," I said, watching his face turn red. I added with a shrug, "Or sir." Before he could continue, I turned to Angie and demanded, "What do you want to talk about?" When he looked like he was going to respond, I shut him down. "I'm talking to my wife. Just sit there, drink your complex amber donkey piss, and keep quiet." Angie was furious and snapped, "Your behavior this afternoon has been disgusting." I wanted to stop now. I nodded, pretending to consider her request. "Do you think my behavior today is better or worse than yours over the last 5 or 6 weeks?" "What are you talking about?" Angie looked both confused and worried. Her companion seemed to be holding his breath, sensing their plan was falling apart. Looking Angie dead in the eyes, I told her, "I'm not sure what angers me more, that you let him put his worthless little hands on you, or that you treat me like an imbecile." The stunned look on Rebecca's face was priceless. Her eyes narrowed, and in a hushed voice, she asked the obvious, "You know, it seems I have more friends at your office than you do," I said. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous email from someone at Kellerman's. It warned me about your affair and included 3 attachments. The pictures showed you at Middlewoods Park, enjoying a picnic, holding hands, and kissing." "I'm sorry you had to find out that way," Rebecca said, clearly trying to figure out how to proceed. "I didn't let her." "So, you want a divorce?" "No," she quickly responded, sliding to the edge of the couch, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "I love you and don't want a divorce. What Michael and I have is just a short-term fling. He's new to Connecticut and hasn't made many friends. Once he's settled, I'm sure he'll find a regular girlfriend." I shook my head. "Sorry, but that doesn't work for me. I signed up for a monogamous relationship with a loving wife, but instead, I've discovered the woman I've devoted my life to is nothing but a cheater. A divorce fits my future plans much better." "David, please stop," Rebecca begged. "I don't want a divorce, and I don't think you do either. This was just a one-time fling and nothing more. I was attracted to Michael and wanted a bit of excitement in my life. It's never happened before, and it will be over soon. It won't happen again, I promise." I took a small sip of my bourbon and let the silence hang for a moment before responding. "First, your promises mean nothing. Everyone in this room knows you're a liar." Rebecca was about to explode, but I cut her off. "And second, why should I believe this is your first affair? For all I know, it's your 51st. Please, you need to stop and think," she pleaded. "We've built a life together, and now that Emma's married and thinking about starting her own family, we can slow down and plan for a wonderful retirement in a few years. My fling with Michael will be long over and forgotten. I stood up, not bothering to ask if they wanted another drink, and walked to the den to refill my glass. I was sure my poor manners weren't lost on the two idiots in the living room. When I returned, they were huddled together, whispering. "May I say a few things, Mr. Whitman?" the man asked. "The floor is yours," I replied, dripping with disdain. He paused to gather his thoughts. "Rebecca is right. Our relationship is just a short-term fling. I regret leading a married woman into an affair. I've never done that before, but we hit it off. As you know, she's a spectacular woman. Your threat of divorce, while understandable in the heat of the moment, would be unwise in the long term. You've invested decades together. Don't throw it away." Rebecca was initially concerned that the prenuptial agreement her father made you both sign would cause her to lose many of her assets in a divorce if we were caught. But as a lawyer, I can assure you that a nearly 30-year-old agreement can be easily overturned. Laws change, legal wording becomes outdated, and any competent attorney could have that document thrown out. Even more important, you need ironclad proof of infidelity. Other than some mild, innocent public flirting that some of our associates may have seen, I'm confident you don't have the evidence necessary to enforce the agreement. As he finished his brilliant legal summation, I couldn't help but wonder how my wife had become so foolish. Turning to Rebecca, I asked, "Why would you take legal advice from a corporate attorney who graduated in the bottom quarter of his class from Texas Southern University Law School?" Texas Southern is consistently ranked as one of the worst law schools in the country. Year in and year out, the man started to stammer. "How did you know?" I cut him off. One of my mottos is know thy enemy. I then turned my attention back to Rebecca. "So, what's your plan moving forward, Angie?" She took a moment to gather her thoughts before saying, "Michael and I are going to spend the weekend together. I'll be staying at his apartment tonight, and tomorrow we're leaving for New York City. We'll stay there tomorrow and Saturday night, and I'll be home on Sunday." Even though I already knew their plans, hearing it from her felt like a punch to the gut. I hoped she saw the sadness in my eyes as I asked, "So, not only have you shared your body with this piece of garbage, but you're also going to share our quarterly getaway weekend with him. We've gone to New York City 4 times a year, every year since we've been married. You've just shattered all those memories. Every Broadway play, every concert, every sporting event. I don't know what's happened to you, Angie, but you've become as much of a mess as he is." I nodded toward her companion. Rebecca could see how devastated I was and tried to respond, but I didn't hear a word. The voices in my head were screaming, "End it. End it now." Looking over at her companion, I asked, "Is your wife okay with this?" "David, stop," Rebecca interrupted. "Michael is a widower. His wife died several years ago. He would never cheat on her." Even he seemed uncomfortable with her defense, cringing at her words. I smirked and replied, "Unlike you." Then, turning back to him, I asked, "Is that true? Are you widowed?" He hesitated, looking between Angie and me before saying, "Yes." I reached down and pulled a manila folder from my backpack, which was sitting beside my chair. I opened it, scanned the first page, and read aloud, "Dr. Natalie Tanner, Emergency Department Surgeon, Ascension Street, Johns Hospital, and Detroit. Husband, Michael. Daughters, Katie, 11, and Lacey, 9. Dr. Browner has resigned from her position effective June 22nd and will be moving to Hartford, Connecticut, to join her husband as soon as their children finish school. She will be taking a similar position at St. Francis Hospital and Medical Center in Hartford. If I wasn't so heartbroken over my marriage, I might have laughed at the look on Rebecca's face. "You lied to me?" she asked, shocked. I couldn't help but laugh. "Can you imagine?" I bellowed. "A cheater and a liar lies to a cheater and a liar. What's this world coming to?" Michael reached out and took Rebecca's hand, but before I could shout, "Get your hands off my wife," I realized something. I just didn't care anymore. "Ang, baby, I'm sorry. I did lie. I couldn't help it. You were so sexy and beautiful, and I wanted you. I needed you, so I lied to have you." He stood up, still holding her hand. "Let's go back to my place and talk. We'll go to New York tomorrow and have a great weekend. When we get back, we'll still have 3 weeks before my family arrives. After that, you can be a full-time wife, and I'll be a full-time husband and father." Rebecca considered her options for a moment before standing up. She took his hand and turned toward me. "After this weekend, I promise to give up Michael completely. I'll come home on Sunday and be the same loving wife I've always been." Angie and I stared at each other for a while, and I wondered if she could hear my already shattered heart breaking even more. I'd sat there, somewhat politely, while they told me about their fling and assured me it wouldn't affect my relationship with Angie in the long term. Now, I wanted my turn. "I'd like to ask that you both sit down and give me 30 minutes to lay out the changes I see happening," I said. They exchanged glances, silently debating. I pushed the issue, saying, "The least you can do is give me 30 minutes of your time." Reluctantly, they sat down. I set up several Zoom meetings for us. I told them, pointing the remote at the TV and pressing a few buttons. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I'd become quite the expert at arranging Zoom meetings. When the TV screen lit up, I said, "Peter, Lou, can you hear me?" "We can, David," Peter answered. "Angie, you know our family attorney, Peter," I continued. "I'd like to introduce you to his partner and my new divorce attorney, Lou. Gentlemen, this is corporate attorney extraordinaire Joshua Tanner." Angie and her lover were stunned as I finished. "Gentlemen, you have the floor." Lou wasted no time. "Mrs. Whitman, I'm representing your husband in your upcoming divorce. Papers were filed with the court earlier this afternoon. I'd greatly appreciate it if you would retain an attorney and make arrangements to be officially served. I'll give you until the end of the day on Monday. If I haven't heard from your attorney, we will hire a process server." "We have filed for divorce on the grounds of infidelity," Lou continued. "We have a private investigator's report that includes detailed audio, visual and telecommunication evidence of your affair with Mr. Tanner." As Lou wrapped up, I tossed a second manila folder onto the coffee table in front of Angie. The loud slap made them both jump. "It's a copy of our divorce petition, including the PI report," I told the stunned pair. While Michael reached for the folder, Angie looked back at the screen. "We will be insisting that the prenuptial agreement is fully enforced," Lou continued. "You're aware that every 2 years, all of your family's business and personal legal matters are reviewed. As part of that review, the prenuptial agreement has been revised to stay within current state legal guidelines. We have your signed and notarized signature for every update over the past 28 years. I'm 100% confident that the prenuptial agreement is fully enforceable." Lou paused before delivering the final blow. "As of last night's vote by the board of directors at Whitman Brokerage, you are relieved of all corporate responsibilities and no longer associated with Mr. Whitman's firm in any way. You have 7 days to return your company car. Your company credit cards have been paid off and cancelled. Your cell phone will be cancelled in 7 days. Your memberships to Cedar Mountain Country Club and LA Fitness have also been cancelled. We've also paid off and cancelled the 3 joint credit cards you shared with my client. Your joint savings, checking, and retirement funds have been frozen. Per the prenuptial agreement, we expect an 80-20 split of cash and near-cash assets in Mr. Whitman's favor. Mr. Whitman will retain the house free and clear. We've requested the court expedite your eviction as you have another residence you've shared with Mr. Tanner. We will argue that it's easier for you to move. We are asking the court to grant Mr. Whitman full possession of the property immediately and give you 30 days to remove your personal belongings from the house. There will be no alimony, and child support is irrelevant. There are also several smaller claims my client has made, which your attorney can explain to you. David, did I miss anything? You've covered all the highlights, Lou. Thanks, I replied. The TV screen went black as the call ended. Angie jumped to her feet, screaming, "Wait!" She turned to me and demanded, "Get them back. I have questions." I laughed. "That's not how it works, Angie. You'll need to hire your own lawyer for answers." "You," Angie growled. "I'm going to destroy you." With a smirk, I looked at her partner in crime and asked, "Hey, genius, what's your legal mind's take on the odds of her destroying me in this divorce?" His silence made Angie sink back into the couch, curling in on herself. I couldn't help but smile ear to ear. I held up the TV remote, waved it at her, and pointed it at the screen as the second Zoom meeting began. "Jake, can you hear me?" I asked. "Hi, David," Jake replied. "I've got a conference call coming up, so I'll make this quick. Browner, you're fired effective immediately. Your personal items are being removed from your office and will be placed in a box in the lobby. If they're not claimed within 24 hours, they'll be thrown out. You won't be receiving a recommendation." Rebecca's boss chimed in next. "Rebecca, I can't tell you how disappointed I am. Your behavior as a senior member of my staff is inexcusable. That said, 29 years of exemplary service must be taken into account. Your position in Hartford has been eliminated, but I'm offering you the same position at our Albany, New York facility. You have a week to decide if you'll take the transfer and 30 days to move to Albany." The screen went blank again. Angie cried into her hands, while Browner slouched back into the couch. I was purposely smirking at Browner when he noticed me, and I saw the rage building in his eyes. He was younger, bigger, and likely stronger, but unfortunately for him, just as stupid as a bag of rocks. He looked ready to explode. I waved the remote again, pointed it at the TV, and pressed a button. The screen lit up, and I asked, "Dr. Browner, can you hear me?" Angie and her lover sat in stunned silence, pale as ghosts with their mouths hanging open. The face of a beautiful blonde filled the screen. "I've asked you to call me Cynthia," she corrected. "Sorry, Cynthia," I replied. "The floor is yours." Michael's wife didn't waste time. "Michael, I've filed for divorce. Expect to be served in the next few days. The kids and I will stay in Michigan, and I've been able to keep my position at the hospital." "Please, Cynthia," Michael begged. "We can work this out. It was just a fling." Cynthia's expression turned to disgust. "I've been doing some checking since David contacted me. This is the third job you've lost because you couldn't keep it in your pants. After I received the private investigator's report, I asked him to dig deeper." Everyone's attention was glued to the screen as Cynthia continued, "Mrs. Whitman, do you know Alice Packer, Joy Likely, or Tori Jones? How about Candy Phillips?" When Angie didn't respond, Cynthia laughed. "I don't expect an answer. The question was rhetorical. I know they're all associates of yours. Did you know Michael had flings with each of them? You were just one of his many affairs. Tell me where to send your belongings, Michael. You're not welcome at my house." As the screen faded to black, Michael yelled, "I'm going to kill you." He struggled to his feet, but I calmly slipped my .45 from between the chair cushions and pointed it at him. His face turned ashen, just the reaction I wanted. "You've got two choices, Michael," I said. "You can leave, or you can sit down and shut up. I don't care what you do, but if you come at me, I'll shoot your left ball off." I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed when he sat back down, but I was glad I could proceed with my final Zoom meeting. I glanced over at Angie. She looked pale, her cheeks streaked with tears and mascara smudged around her eyes. She looked awful. "I've been seeing a counselor for the last 2 weeks," I said. Angie groaned, burying her face in her hands. "It's kind of funny," I continued. "You cheat, lie, and share yourself with this scumbag, and I'm the one who needs a mental health expert. How messed up is that? I laughed bitterly. A few moments later, I told Rebecca. After I told Dr. Reynolds our story, she asked me a question that really helped me. She asked if I understood the old saying, "Love is blind." It was like a light turning on in a dark room. I loved you so much that I never would have known you were cheating if not for that anonymous email. My love was so strong that it overlooked all your flaws. Hell, in my eyes, you didn't have any. I hope you realize you'll never find anyone who will love you as much as I did. Angie continued to cry, rocking back and forth on the couch. I'm going to keep seeing Dr. Reynolds, I said. I think it's important to have someone to trust with your innermost thoughts and feelings, especially after something this devastating. I never imagined someone I love so much could humiliate and disrespect me to this extent. But the good news is I'll get over the hurt and humiliation, just like I'll get over you. I told Dr. Reynolds about my plan for today. She's not a big fan of revenge, but agreed that the first 3 Zoom meetings were justified. She thought you deserved some payback. However, she did try to talk me out of this next Zoom meeting, warning it might set back my personal recovery. I thought about it and realized she's probably right. It will hurt me, but I don't care. This next meeting will hurt both of us. I held up the remote one last time and waved it at Angie, who shrunk back into the couch in panic. I pointed it at the TV and pressed the button. All eyes were glued to the screen. When the face appeared, Angie groaned. "Oh no, please God, no." "I love you, Daddy," said my daughter Emma. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied. Angie shrieked. "Why? How could you possibly be this awful to me?" Emma's voice was calm but firm. "I heard it all, Mom. I've heard every word you and your boyfriend have said over the last hour. I know what you've done and what you plan to do. You disgust me." "Sweetheart, please," Angie pleaded. "This is a complicated situation. You're too young to understand." Emma's response was sharp. "Mom, I'm 26 years old, a happily married woman. Your situation isn't complicated. It's grotesque and pitiful. I don't know what's changed, but you've become selfish and totally self-absorbed." Angie was breathing heavily as she begged. "Emma, baby, I've been so lonely since you moved away. It's like I've been living in a fog. I missed you so much." Emma looked perplexed. "So what you're saying, Mom, is that it's my fault you become a liar and a cheat, crushed Dad, and are now getting divorced?" "No, that's not what I'm saying, and you know it," Angie stammered. "It doesn't matter, Mom," Emma said coldly. "I think we'd all need a break from you. I'll come to Boston this weekend, and we can talk," Rebecca shouted. "I'm so sorry this happened. I need to be with my baby girl." "That's not going to work, Mom, for 2 reasons," Emma replied. "First, you'll be in New York with your worthless, unemployed, soon-to-be ex-boyfriend." "I'm not going to New York," Rebecca insisted. "And second," Emma continued, "Scott and I have planned a small, private celebration for our closest family and friends. We've rented Avenue near Cape Cod." "Baby, what are you celebrating?" Angie asked, her voice trembling. "Since you weren't invited, I'll tell you," Emma said, her voice steady. "I'm 3 months pregnant, and we're having a baby girl in February. Emma, I'm your mother, and I insist you invite me," Angie demanded. "That's not going to happen, Mom," Emma replied firmly. "I want my special party to be filled with love and happiness, not the lying, cheating, and disrespect that's consuming your life right now. Goodbye, Mom." For the 4th time, the screen went blank as Angie sat there, crying. I got to my feet and tucked my pistol into the back of my pants. "I'm going out for dinner and will be back in 2 hours," I said. Looking at Rebecca, I added, "Please pack your clothes and essentials. You won't be allowed back into the house until the court responds to my divorce petition, which should take about a week." Turning to Michael, I said, "You've seen what I'm capable of. I'm giving you 3 days to move out of the state. If you're still here on Monday, I'll make sure you're crippled in a much more literal sense. As I opened the front door, I looked back at the utterly defeated pair and said, "Enjoy your weekend in New York. It's supposed to be beautiful both days."
Even after 10 years, Loretta's voice still had the power to make the room feel colder. "Mara, darling, is that you?" The familiar, crisp tone sliced through the chatter of the salon, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to face my former mother-in-law, her perfectly coiffed hair and tailored suit, a jarring contrast to the casual atmosphere. "Loretta," I managed, my throat tightening. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes narrowed, scanning me with disdain. "Is that any way to greet family? Especially after all this time." She pursed her lips, ignoring the curious stares from the other stylists and clients. I fought the urge to recoil, steadying my voice. "We both know you never considered me family." Loretta waved a dismissive hand. "Water under the bridge, my dear. I'm actually here because I need your help." Her gaze flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "It's about Eli." My ex-husband's name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade, not since Loretta orchestrated our bitter separation shortly after Avery's birth, cutting me off from my own daughter. "You have some nerve," I said through gritted teeth. "After everything you put me through, everything you cost me." "Please, Mara." Loretta's tone softened, but her eyes remained steely. "This isn't about the past, it's about Avery." My heart clenched at the mention of my little girl, now a young woman I barely knew thanks to Loretta's machinations. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. Loretta leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Eli's in trouble, deeper than I can handle alone, and my health." She trailed off, a rare vulnerability flickering across her features. I studied her for a long moment, 1,000 memories and recriminations swirling in my mind. Part of me wanted to turn away, to sever the last thread tying me to that toxic family. But the thought of Avery, caught in the crossfire of whatever drama Loretta had woven, tugged at my heart. Finally, I exhaled a long breath. "All right, Loretta, I'll hear you out, but I'm not making any promises." A ghost of a smile played across her lips, and for a fleeting instant I saw the same calculating glint that had haunted me for years. "Of course, dear. That's all I ask." As Loretta slid into the chair across from me at the cafe, I steeled myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table, a nervous tic I recognized from our past encounters. "I don't have much time to mince words, Mara," she began, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial tone. "Eli's in deep trouble, and it's all my fault." I tensed at the mention of my ex-husband's name, memories of our toxic marriage flooding back. "What did you do this time, Loretta?" She bristled at my accusatory tone. "Don't take that tone with me, young lady. I'm trying to make things right." Her brow furrowed, and for a moment she looked every bit her age. "Eli's gambling addiction has spiraled out of control. He's racked up debts with some unsavory characters, and they're threatening to come after Avery if he doesn't pay up." A chill ran down my spine. My own daughter, caught up in the mess Loretta had created. "Why should I believe a word you say?" I shot back, my voice sharpened by years of pent-up anger. "You've done nothing but manipulate and lie since the day we met." Loretta recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "You think I wanted any of this?" she hissed. "I tried to mold him into the man this family needed, but he was weak, just like his father. This is the price of my failure as a mother." I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Failure as a mother? You drove a wedge between us from the start, Loretta. You never gave our marriage a chance because you couldn't stand the thought of not being in control." Her eyes flashed with fury, but she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. In that moment, I saw the truth laid bare. Her selfish need for power had destroyed not just my life, but her own son's as well. "You threw me out when I needed family the most," I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "What could you possibly want now?" Loretta's gaze dropped, and for a long moment she said nothing. Finally, she met my eyes, her own brimming with unshed tears. "I want to make it right, Mara, for Avery's sake, if nothing else." I studied her closely, searching for any hint of deception, but behind the poise and arrogance, I saw only a broken woman. grasping at one last chance to salvage something from the wreckage she'd created. "What did you have in mind?" I asked cautiously, silently bracing myself for whatever new manipulation she had up her sleeve. Loretta took a deep breath, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tabletop. "I want you to come live with us, Mara. Be the stabilizing force Eli and Avery so desperately need." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You can't be serious," I sputtered. "After everything you've done, you expect me to just waltz back into that toxic environment?" "Do you think this is easy for me?" Loretta snapped, her composure slipping. "Swallowing my pride and asking for your help? But Eli's spiraling, and I'm not getting any younger. If he keeps going down this path, my entire legacy could be squandered." I shook my head in disbelief. Of course, it all came back to her precious legacy and control over the family fortune. "Your greed is what got us into this mess in the first place, Loretta. Why should I trust you now?" She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that gave me pause. "Because for once, my interests align with yours. We both want what's best for Avery." My breath caught in my throat at the mention of my daughter's name. It had been nearly a decade since I'd last seen her, just a young girl ripped from my arms by Loretta's manipulations. The thought of being reunited with her, of protecting her from the chaos Eli had created, tugged at my heart. "You'll have a chance to make things right," Loretta pressed on, sensing my hesitation. "To be the mother you always wanted to be. Isn't that worth taking a chance?" I searched her face for any hint of deception, but her expression remained earnest. Or was I just seeing what I wanted to see, falling for her lies once again? "All right," I said slowly, my mouth suddenly dry. "I'll do it. But not for you, Loretta, for Avery." A satisfied smile crept across her lips. "Of course, dear, whatever you say." As she rose to leave, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was walking into yet another trap, one expertly laid by the master manipulator herself. But the prospect of reconnecting with my daughter, of offering her the stability and love I'd been denied, outweighed my misgivings. "He's ruined, Mara," Loretta said, her voice low and urgent. "If not for him, do it for Avery." And with those parting words, she was gone, leaving me to wrestle with the weight of my decision and the sinking suspicion that I was merely a pawn in her latest game. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. The lines on my face seemed deeper, etched by years of heartache and loneliness. Was I really considering walking back into the lion's den, putting myself at Loretta's mercy once again? A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called out, turning to see Grace letting herself in, a concerned look on her face. "You've been awfully quiet since our lunch the other day," she said, taking a seat on the couch. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I sighed, sinking down next to her. Grace had been my rock through the darkest days, holding me together when Loretta's machinations threatened to tear me apart. If anyone could help me make sense of this tangled mess, it was her. "Loretta wants me to move back in," I confessed, the words feeling surreal as they left my lips, "to help with Eli and Avery." Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. "After everything she put you through? Mara, you can't seriously be considering this." "I have to at least try, Grace," I insisted, my voice thick with emotion. "Avery is caught in the middle of their dysfunction, and I owe it to her to be there." Grace reached out, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "But at what cost to yourself? That woman nearly destroyed you once. Who's to say she won't try again?" Her words struck a chord, dredging up memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The constant belittling and manipulation, the emotional abuse that had left me a hollow shell of my former self, all orchestrated by Loretta's cruel hand. "You're right," I whispered, blinking back tears. "She's a viper, and I'd be a fool to trust her again." Grace pulled me into a comforting embrace, and for a moment I allowed myself to be enveloped in her warmth and support. "Maybe it's not about giving them a second chance," she said gently, pulling back to meet my gaze, "but about giving yourself one." Her words hung in the air, their weight slowly sinking in. For years, I'd been defined by my past, by the pain and rejection Loretta had inflicted upon me. But what if this was an opportunity to reshape my narrative, to confront those demons head-on and reclaim the life I deserved? "You're right," I said, feeling a newfound resolve stirring within me. "It's time I stopped running from my past and faced it head-on." Grace beamed. giving my shoulder an affectionate squeeze. "That's my girl. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get hurt again." I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Don't worry, I've got this. It's time to show Loretta that she doesn't hold all the cards anymore." As I spoke the words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a steely determination. No more hiding, no more running. This time I would face my demons on my own terms and emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The imposing wrought iron gates of the Blackwood estate loomed before me, their intricate patterns casting eerie shadows in the fading light. Taking a deep breath, I steeled my resolve and pressed the call button on the intercom. "State your business." A gruff voice barked through the speaker. "It's Mara," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. "Loretta is expecting me." There was a momentary pause, then a harsh buzz as the gate swung open with a groan of protest. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, willing my hands to stop shaking as I guided my car up the winding driveway. The sprawling mansion looked just as I remembered, cold, imposing, every inch a monument to Loretta's wealth and status. I cut the engine, the silence pressing in around me like a vice. "You've got this," I muttered under my breath, grabbing my bag from the passenger seat. Time to face the demons. The heavy oak door swung open before I could knock, and there stood Loretta, perfectly coiffed as ever, regarding me with a critical eye. "You're late," she said by way of greeting, her tone clipped. "I expected more punctuality from you, Mara." I bristled at her condescending tone, but bit back the retort on the tip of my tongue. "My apologies. Traffic was heavier than I anticipated." Loretta pursed her lips, clearly unimpressed with my excuse. "Well, come in then. No sense standing out in the cold." I followed her into the cavernous foyer, my eyes adjusting to the dim lighting and hushed atmosphere. Not a single thing had changed. The same antique furniture, the same austere decor, the same oppressive air of joyless affluence. "This house hasn't changed," I remarked, unable to contain the edge of bitterness in my voice. "Cold and full of secrets, just like its owner." Loretta whirled on me, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Mind your tongue, Mara," she hissed. "You're here on my terms, remember?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps on the marble staircase drew our attention. My breath caught in my throat as a young woman descended, her features achingly familiar. "Avery," I whispered, drinking in the sight of my daughter, now a beautiful young woman of 18. She paused on the landing, her eyes narrowing as she studied me with guarded curiosity. "So you're the one Gran's been going on about," she said, her tone laced with skepticism. "The big solution to all our problems." Before I could reply, another figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Eli. My ex-husband looked haggard and worn, his eyes rimmed with dark circles and his clothes rumpled. He regarded me with a mixture of surprise and wariness, as though I were a ghost from another life. "Well, well," he muttered, descending the stairs to stand beside Avery. "If it isn't the prodigal wife returning." Acid rose in my throat as I struggled to maintain my composure in the face of their blatant hostility. Squaring my shoulders, I met Eli's gaze head-on. "I'm not here for you," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I'm here for Avery, to try and undo the damage you've clearly inflicted on her life." Eli recoiled as if I'd struck him, while Avery's eyes widened fractionally. Loretta cleared her throat, stepping between us with a tight smile plastered across her face. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," she chided, resting a hand on Avery's shoulder in a gesture that seemed almost possessive. "We're all family here, are we not?" Her words rang hollow, the false veneer of civility doing little to mask the undercurrent of tension crackling through the air. As I looked from Eli's broken form to Avery's guarded expression, I knew in that moment that Loretta had bulk. Well, truly met her match. This was going to be a battle, and I had every intention of emerging victorious, no matter what it took. The days that followed were a tense dance of forced civility and thinly veiled hostility. Eli avoided me like the plague, while Avery regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, clearly unsure what to make of this sudden reappearance in her life. Loretta, ever the consummate hostess, maintained a facade of familial harmony, but I could see the cracks in her composure growing wider with each passing day. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and I knew better than to let my guard down. It all came to a head one evening as I was making my way to the kitchen for a late-night cup of tea. As I passed Loretta's study, the soft glow of a lamp caught my eye, along with the unmistakable sounds of shuffling papers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself drawn to the slightly ajar door. Peering through the gap, I saw Loretta hunched over her desk, a frown creasing her brow as she pored over what appeared to be legal documents. "This has to be airtight," she muttered to herself, scribbling furiously. No room for error. I leaned closer, straining to make out the words on the pages before her. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the words "Last Will and Testament" emblazoned across the top. Of course. It all made sense now. Loretta's sudden invitation, her insistence on having me under her roof once more. This was never about reconciliation or righting past wrongs. It was about securing her wealth, using me as a pawn to control Avery's future. White-hot anger surged through me as the pieces fell into place. Loretta was up to her old tricks, manipulating everyone around her like marionettes on a string. Well, not this time. I'd been fooled once, but never again. Before I could stop myself, I pushed open the door and strode into the study, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Loretta's head snapped up, her eyes widening in surprise and alarm. "Mara, what are you doing in here?" "Cut the act, Loretta," I spat, snatching the papers from her desk and waving them in her face. "I know what game you're playing." Her expression hardened, the mask of false civility slipping away to reveal the cold, calculating woman I knew so well. "So you've figured it out, have you?" she sneered. "Took you long enough." "It was never about redemption," I accused, my voice trembling with fury. "It was always about control, using me to keep a leash on Avery, just like you tried to do with me all those years ago." Loretta rose from her chair, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Oh, Mara, always so naive, even after all this time." She tutted softly, shaking her head. "Did you really think I'd let some washed-up hairstylist waltz back into my family and undo everything I've built? This is about preserving my legacy, and if you can't see that, then you're even more foolish than I thought." I recoiled as if she'd struck me, her words cutting deeper than any physical blow. In that moment, I saw the true depths of her depravity, the lengths she would go to maintain her iron grip on our lives. "You're a monster, Loretta," I whispered, hot tears stinging my eyes, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about you." Her laughter was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and mocking. "Go ahead and try, dear. Who do you think they'll believe, me or the bitter ex-wife with a grudge?" As she spoke those words, I knew she was right. Loretta had spent years cultivating her image, weaving an intricate web of lies and deceit. But this time I had proof of her true nature, tangible evidence of her manipulation. Squaring my shoulders, I met her gaze with newfound resolve. "We'll see about that, Loretta. This isn't over, not by a long shot." With the documents clutched tightly in my hand, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the study, my mind already whirring with plans for how to expose Loretta's true colors to the world. The battle lines had been drawn, and this time I had no intention of losing. The tension was palpable as Loretta's extended family gathered for her annual summer garden party. Elegantly dressed guests milled about the perfectly manicured grounds, sipping champagne and exchanging polite small talk while a string quartet provided a refined backdrop. I lingered near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of lemonade and scanning the crowd for any sign of Avery. If I was going to expose Loretta's machinations, I needed her granddaughter on my side. "There you are." Loretta's saccharine voice cut through the din as she materialized at my elbow, her perfectly coiffed hair and impeccable pearl ensemble a sharp contrast to the fire burning in her eyes. "I was beginning to think you'd skipped out on us and missed the chance to spend quality time with my favorite family," I countered, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Perish the thought." She fixed me with a withering glare. "Watch your tone, Mara. We have appearances to maintain." "Is that all you care about?" I shot back, unable to contain my mounting frustration. "Keeping up your pristine image while you manipulate everyone around you like puppets?" Loretta's perfectly sculpted features contorted with rage, her mask of gentility slipping. "How dare you speak to me that way?" she hissed, leaning in close. "After everything I've done for you, ungrateful wretch." "Done for me?" I laughed bitterly. You mean like driving a wedge between me and my own daughter? Or using me as some pawn in your twisted game to control Avery's inheritance? Her eyes widened fractionally, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Before she could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. Gran, everything okay over here? Avery approached us, her brow furrowed with concern as she took in the palpable tension between Loretta and me. Loretta immediately plastered on a sickly sweet smile. Of course, darling. Your grandmother and I were just catching up. I couldn't resist the urge to scoff audibly, drawing Avery's curious gaze. Seizing the opportunity, I pressed on, heedless of Loretta's furious glare. Your grandmother's been keeping secrets from you, Avery, I said, my voice low and intense, about her real reasons for bringing me back into this family. Avery's eyes flicked uncertainly between us as Loretta spluttered indignantly. Don't listen to her lies, sweetheart. She's clearly unwell. But I was on a roll now, propelled by years of pent-up anger and resentment. Fishing the crumpled legal documents from my pocket, I thrust them toward Avery. See for yourself. She's been plotting to use you to control your inheritance and keep her grubby hands on the family fortune. I turned to Loretta, my gaze blazing with righteous fury. You used everyone as your pawns, Loretta, but this is where it ends. A hush fell over the gathering as heads turned in our direction, drawn by the commotion. Loretta's face drained of color, her perfectly composed veneer cracking to reveal the ugliness lurking beneath. Avery stared at the documents in her hands, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization as the truth sank in. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Loretta's, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Is it true, Gran? She asked, her voice small and tremulous. Have you been lying to me this whole time? For a long, agonizing moment, Loretta said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Then, with a sigh of resignation, she gave a curt nod. I did what I had to do, she said stiffly, to protect our legacy, our family name. Avery recoiled as if struck, shaking her head in disbelief. You're unbelievable, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. All this time, I thought. Her words trailed off as she turned toward me, a silent apology in her eyes. In that moment, I knew I'd won, not just the battle against Loretta's manipulations, but Avery's trust as well. As the gathering dissolved into hushed whispers and furtive glances, Loretta stood alone, her meticulously constructed facade in ruins around her. The master puppeteer at last unmasked. The gentle tinkle of the bell above the door mingled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of conversation. I took a moment to savor the warmth and energy of the bustling salon, a contented smile tugging at my lips. Order up for table 4. Avery's voice rang out from the small kitchen area, drawing a chorus of laughter from the group of regulars gathered around one of the cozy bistro tables. It had been 6 months since that fateful evening, when the truth about Loretta's schemes finally came to light. In the aftermath, everything had unraveled with startling swiftness. The strained relationships within the family, the tightly guarded web of control Loretta had so carefully constructed, all of it crumbling like a house of cards. Avery had been my fiercest ally throughout, standing by my side as I navigated the messy legal battles and bitter recriminations that followed. With her support, I'd finally been able to extract myself from the toxic grip of Loretta's influence, emerging stronger and more determined than ever before. And now, here we were, partners in more than just name, having pooled our resources to open this quaint little salon and cafe, a cozy oasis worlds away from the cold opulence of the Blackwood estate. Incoming! Avery called out in mock warning as she deposited a tray laden with steaming mugs and pastries on the table to a round of cheery thanks. I watched her work the room with a natural grace and warmth, effortlessly charming the customers as she topped up coffees and swapped friendly banter. In those unguarded moments, I could see so much of myself in her. The same resilient spirit, the same quiet determination that had carried me through the darkest days of my divorce and estrangement. We're not just rebuilding our lives, Avery, I murmured, catching her eye as she circled back toward the counter. We're reclaiming them. She flashed me a conspiratorial grin, sliding an arm around my shoulders in a quick, affectionate squeeze. You got that right. No more letting other people dictate our story. Her words struck a chord deep within me, a poignant reminder of just how far we'd come. For so long, I'd allowed Loretta's toxicity and manipulation to define my narrative, to strip away my autonomy and sense of self-worth. But not anymore. This salon, this vibrant hub of warmth and community, was a living testament to our perseverance, a reclamation of the life I'd always envisioned for myself and my daughter. A life free from the shadows of bitterness and control that had loomed over us for far too long. As the afternoon stretched on, and the hum of lively conversation and laughter filled the air, I found myself stealing furtive glances at the framed newspaper clipping mounted proudly on the wall. The bold headline, "Family Feud Erupts, Blackwood Empire in Turmoil," felt like a relic from another lifetime, a stark reminder of just how far we'd come. Loretta's once formidable influence had withered in the wake of her exposed machinations, leaving her isolated and diminished, a specter of her former self. The vast fortune and legacy she'd safeguarded so ruthlessly had slipped through her grasping fingers, a fitting cosmic comeuppance for the suffering she'd inflicted. But dwelling on her downfall brought me no satisfaction, no sense of victory or revenge. As I surveyed the cozy warmth of the salon, my gaze settling on Avery's radiant smile, I realized that this, the hard-won bond between mother and daughter, the freedom to forge our own path, was the greatest triumph of all. No more pawns in someone else's game, no more victims of manipulation and control. Just two women, boldly authoring the next chapter of their lives on their own terms. And in that moment, awash in the contentment and possibility that surrounded us, I knew our story was just beginning.